The acid rain of Port Vega never stopped falling, each drop leaving tiny scars on the metal shanties that stretched endlessly beyond the colony's protective dome. In the forgotten quarter where the dome's shield flickered and failed, Nyx pressed herself deeper into the corroded alcove that had become her world, her forearms wrapped around her knees, creating a protective shell that hid most of her opalescent skin from the curious stares of passersby. The shifting purple and silver patterns that marked her as Zeridian had long since been covered by layers of grime and makeshift clothing scavenged from the waste processors. At 19, she had learned that beauty could be a curse when you had nothing else to offer. The morning crowd shuffled past her hiding spot, dock workers heading to the freight yards, vendors setting up their stalls of questionable food, security drones humming overhead with their red scanning lights. None of them saw her. After 5 years of living in the spaces between spaces, Nyx had perfected the art of becoming nothing. Her stomach cramped with familiar hunger. The last meal had been 2 days ago, moldy bread stolen from behind a food cart while the vendor argued with a customer. She'd shared half with the 3-legged Corvin pup that had started following her around the sector. The pup had more right to exist than she did. At least the colony's animal welfare protocols acknowledged its species. Nyx flexed her lower right hand, feeling the calluses from years of scraping together survival. Her people, the Zeridians, were known throughout the galaxy for their telepathic networks' vast mental webs that connected entire populations across star systems. Children developed their psychic abilities by age 5, joining the collective consciousness that made their species so valuable as negotiators and translators. Nyx had been born silent. No mental voice, no connection to the network, no value to anyone, including her own kind. When the Zeridian transport had stopped at Port Vega for refueling, her birth parents had simply forgotten to count her when they reboarded. The colonial authorities had processed her as an abandoned minor, assigned her a file number, and promptly lost track of her when budget cuts eliminated the Youth Services Department. Somewhere in the massive databanks of the Colonial Registry, computer file marked her as deceased unconfirmed. It was easier than admitting the system had failed a child. She watched a group of young humans laugh as they passed, their voices carrying easily through the thin atmosphere. One of them pointed at her alcove and made a joke she couldn't hear, but understood from their gestures. The old shame burned in her chest, but she'd learned to compress it into something small and hard that wouldn't break her. The rain intensified, driving the crowd toward covered areas. Nyx pulled her scavenged tarp tighter and settled in to wait for nightfall, when the real scavenging could begin. Marcus Chun Rivera had been staring at corrupted data files for 6 hours straight when the anomaly caught his attention. The Colonial Registry's basement archives smelled of mold and ozone, lit by flickering fluorescent strips that cast everything in sickly yellow. His exile from the Titan research station had landed him here, Port Vega's forgotten corner. Processing the forgotten files of forgotten people, the entry should have been routine. Subject 7749Z, Zeridian female, age 14 at intake. Status deceased and confirmed. But the biometric scan, attached to the file, showed someone very much alive. The facial recognition software had flagged it 3 days ago during a routine cross-reference with security footage from the market district. Marcus leaned back in his creaking chair, running tired hands through his graying hair. 5 years ago, he'd been one of the galaxy's leading experts on alien physiology, published in every major xenobiology journal. Then he'd discovered that his research station was conducting illegal experiments on sentient beings, testing pain thresholds, psychological breaking points, genetic manipulation without consent. When he tried to expose it, his career had died overnight. Now he spent his days in this tomb of bureaucracy, correcting typos in death certificates and processing residency applications for species most humans couldn't pronounce. The work was mind-numbing. But it had taught him something his prestigious research never had. Every file represented a life, and every life had been shaped by the casual cruelty of systems that valued efficiency over existence. The girl in the security footage looked exactly like her intake photo, just 5 years older and infinitely more haunted. Her four-armed silhouette was unmistakable as she moved through the market shadows, carefully avoiding the main thoroughfares where patrol drones operated. The timestamp showed she'd been recorded just yesterday. Marcus pulled up the case details. Zeridian minor found alone during a routine transport inspection. No guardian claimed her. Temporary placement in youth services had lasted exactly 37 days before the department was dissolved due to budget constraints. The file had been automatically flagged for closure. Some overworked clerk had marked her as presumed deceased, rather than deal with the paperwork of finding her actual whereabouts. For 5 years, she'd been living as a ghost, no legal identity, no access to services, no protection under colonial law. She existed in the cracks between bureaucratic indifference and systematic neglect. Marcus had seen this pattern before, both in his research days and here in the archives. Marginalized beings, the disabled, the different, the inconvenient disappeared from official records while continuing to struggle in the shadows. The girl's Zeridian heritage made it worse. Without telepathic abilities, she would have been considered defective by her own people. It's unwanted by humans who didn't understand her physiology. He printed the file and attached the security footage stills. The anomaly report would normally go to his supervisor, who would rubber stamp it as a clerical error and move on. Instead, Marcus locked it in his desk drawer. That evening, he walked the long route home through the market district, his trained eye cataloging the spaces where someone small and careful might find shelter. Near the defunct electronics quarter, he spotted her, a figure huddled beneath a corrugated overhang, four arms barely visible beneath layers of salvaged fabric. Marcus stopped at a food cart and bought an extra meal, wrapping it carefully in clean cloth. Tomorrow he would find a reason to walk this route again. The second time Marcus passed through the electronics quarter, Nyx was waiting. Not obviously, she'd learned that obvious waiting attracted the wrong kind of attention, but positioned where she could see him coming. The human who walked differently than the others. Hood left food in her path 3 times now without demanding payment or explanation. She studied him from her shadowed alcove, middle-aged, tired around the edges, carrying himself like someone who'd learned to be careful. His clothes were clean but worn, the kind of practical garments that said, "I work in an office but don't make enough to care about fashion." Oh. When he stopped near her usual corner, she noticed he kept his hands visible and didn't try to make eye contact. "I brought tea this time," he said quietly, setting down a thermal container beside the usual food packet. "It stays warm for hours." Nyx's throat was raw from the acid rain, but accepting drinks felt more dangerous than accepting food. Drinks could be drugged. Food was just food. She'd learned to identify most common toxins by smell. "You're not colonial." "Security," she said, speaking aloud for the first time in weeks. Her voice came out as a rasp, harsh from disuse. Marcus turned slightly, enough to hear her clearly, but not enough to seem threatening. "Data processing. I work with files." "Whose files?" "Everyone's, including yours." He paused, choosing his words carefully. "According to the Colonial Registry, you died 5 years ago." Nyx felt something cold settle in her stomach that had nothing to do with hunger. Being invisible was one thing. Being officially dead was another. Dead people couldn't apply for work permits, housing assistance, medical care. No rights at all. "Are you here to make it official?" she asked. "I'm here to fix the mistake." Marcus pulled out a slim tablet, its screen showing what looked like a legal document. "Your name is registered as Nyx Kalen 7749, Zeridian female, age 14, at last update. The system marked you as deceased when youth services lost track of your placement." She emerged from the alcove slowly, keeping her distance, but close enough to see the screen. The file photo was her intake image from 5 years ago, scared, confused, still expecting someone to come for her. The current status field showed a red stamp, deceased unconfirmed. "I can change that," Marcus said. "But I need your consent. And I need to know, do you want to exist officially?" The question hit her harder than she'd expected.
Oh.
For years, she'd survived by being no one, by slipping through cracks and avoiding notice. Official existence meant official scrutiny. It meant showing up on databases that colonial security could access. It meant being countable, trackable, responsible, but it also meant being real. "What happens to you if you help me?" she asked. Marcus considered this. Probably nothing good. "My supervisor doesn't appreciate initiative. Then why?" He looked at her directly for the first time, and she saw something in his eyes. She recognized the particular weariness that came from watching systems crush people who deserved better. "Because everyone deserves to exist," he said simply. Nix looked at the tablet screen, the red stamp that had defined her non-life for 5 years. She thought about the Corvin pup who followed her around, who had never questioned his right to exist simply because he was alive. "I want to exist," she said. Dr. Yuki Tanaka found Marcus waiting outside her clinic when she arrived for the morning shift. A Zeridian girl standing nervously beside him, Sport Viga's only xenobiologist turned meta. Yuki had seen her share of unusual cases, but something about this pair immediately put her on alert. "She needs a proper biometric scan for the registry correction," Marcus explained as Yuki unlocked the clinic doors. "The Colonial Health Database requires current medical documentation to verify identity." The girl Nix Marcus had called her kept all 4 arms wrapped protectively around herself, her opalescent skin muted with stress patterns. Yuki recognized the signs of chronic malnutrition and exposure damage, but more concerning were the psychological markers. Hypervigilance, defensive posturing, the way she positioned herself near exits. "Have you been examined by a medical professional before?" Yuki asked gently as she led them into her private office. "No," Nix replied, her voice barely above a whisper. Yuki nodded, understanding. Zeridians were notoriously private about medical care, and one living without legal status would have avoided any official contact. "We'll take this slowly. You control the pace, and you can stop any time you feel uncomfortable." The examination revealed what Yuki had suspected: severe vitamin deficiencies, chronic respiratory irritation from acid rain exposure, and the kind of stress-related health issues that came from years of survival living. But Nix's physiology was fascinating. Her 4-armed configuration was actually quite rare among Zeridians, appearing in less than 2% of the population. "You're what we call a prime variant," Yuki explained as she completed her scans. "In Zeridian culture, your physical configuration is considered exceptionally valuable for certain types of work technical operations. Surgical procedures, complex manufacturing." Nick stiffened. "But I can't connect to their neural networks. I was born broken." Yuki paused in her documentation, recognizing the self-loathing in those words. She'd heard similar statements from patients across dozens of species beings who'd been told they were defective simply because they were different. "Neural connectivity isn't everything," she said carefully. "In fact, your independence from the collective might be considered an advantage in many situations. Zeridian networks can be compromised by external interference, psionic attacks, technological disruption, chemical imbalances. You're immune to all of that. That's not how my birth parents saw it." "Your birth parents made a mistake," Yuki said firmly, "a costly one that nearly destroyed a life of incredible potential." While Yuki worked, Marcus explained the legal process he'd initiated. The registry correction was complex, but doable. Nix would need to appear before a colonial magistrate, provide biometric confirmation of her identity, and formally request restoration of her legal status. "There's one complication," Marcus admitted. "The magistrate will want to know why no one reported the error for 5 years. If we're not careful, this could trigger an investigation into youth services negligence." "Good," Yuki said sharply, startling both of them. "Maybe it's time someone was held accountable for the children who fall through the cracks." She finished her scans and compiled a comprehensive medical report, not just the basic biometrics Marcus needed, but a full psychological and physical assessment that documented the harm caused by 5 years of systematic neglect. If there was going to be an investigation, she wanted the evidence to be undeniable. "Nix," she said as she handed over the sealed medical files, "I want you to know that what happened to you was not your fault. You were failed by every system that was supposed to protect you, but that's ending now, for the first time since entering the clinic." Nix met her eyes directly. "What if existing officially makes things worse?" Yuki smiled. "Then we'll deal with worse together. You're not invisible anymore. 6 months after Marcus first spotted her in the security footage, Nix stood before Magistrate Alina Voss in Colonial Court Chamber 7, holding her newly printed identification card. The holographic seal caught the light as she turned it over. In her hands, all four of them, steady now instead of shaking. The hearing had taken less than an hour. Marcus had presented the documentation with clinical precision. The original intake file, the erroneous death certificate, Dr. Tanaka's medical assessment, and a detailed timeline of bureaucratic failures. Magistrate Voss had listened with growing anger, her questions becoming sharper as the full scope of the negligence became clear. Ms. Excalen, the magistrate had said finally. On behalf of the Colonial Authority, I offer you our sincerest apologies. The failures you have endured represent the worst aspects of our administrative systems. But apologies didn't erase 5 years. They didn't heal the damage or restore the lost time. What mattered was what came next. Dr. Tanaka had offered Nix a position at her clinic initially as a patient advocate, helping other marginalized beings navigate the medical system, but with training toward becoming a xenobiological technician. Nix's forearmed dexterity made her naturally suited for complex procedures, and her lived experience gave her insights no textbook could provide. The first few patients were scared of me, Nix told Marcus as they shared lunch outside the clinic. 6 weeks into her new job? But when I told them I'd been invisible too, that I understood what it felt like to be forgotten, they started listening. Marcus smiled, noting how much stronger she looked. Regular meals and medical care had restored. The natural luminescence to her skin and her movements had lost their furtive, hunted quality. More importantly, she'd found her voice literally and figuratively. The investigation into youth services had resulted in 3 dismissals and a complete overhaul of the abandonment protocols. New procedures required multiple confirmations before any minor could be marked as deceased, and Dr. Tanaka had been appointed to an oversight committee ensuring proper medical care for non-human children. Marcus had faced his own reckoning. His supervisor had attempted to discipline him for exceeding his authority in correcting the registry files. But the magistrate's public commendation had made him untouchable. He'd been quietly transferred to a new position, Director of Registry Reconciliation, tasked with finding other dead people who were still very much alive. I found 12 more cases this week, he reported to Nix during one of their regular check-ins. 3 Arcturian refugees, a pair of Centauri twins, and 7 humans from the outer settlements, all marked deceased due to clerical errors or system failures. And now they exist again. Thanks to the protocols you helped us establish. Nix looked out over the market district, where she'd once hidden in shadows and stolen scraps, to survive. The same vendors worked the same stalls, but now they nodded respectfully when she passed. Some even saved aside items they thought she might need medical supplies for the clinic, or news about other beings who might benefit from her advocacy work. The 3-legged Corvin pup, grown now into a dignified adult, trotted over to greet her. He wore a collar that identified him as a registered therapy animal at Dr. Tanaka's clinic, where he helped comfort patients during difficult procedures. Do you ever think about finding your birth parents? Marcus asked quietly. Nix considered this. The Zeridian networks were vast but not impossible to navigate, and her official status now gave her the right to request contact. Maybe someday, she said finally. But I've learned that family isn't just about who shares your DNA or your neural frequency. It's about who sees you when you're invisible, who feeds you when you're hungry, and who helps you exist when the world says you don't matter. She gestured toward the clinic where Dr. Tanaka was teaching a group of young medics about multi-species physiology, and toward the registry office where Marcus was methodically resurrecting the forgotten dead. I already have a family, she said. We're building something better than what was there before. The acid rain had stopped falling that morning, the first clear day Port Vega had seen in months. In the unprecedented sunlight, Nix's opalescent skin shimmered with patterns of silver and gold, beautiful and strange and entirely, undeniably real.